Hello everyone and welcome to my top 10 tips to fly the Mig-19 Farmer in DCS World. As with all of my top 10 tips videos, these are aimed at beginners. I myself would consider myself to be a beginner still with the Mig-19, so we're not going to go into anything too advanced. At the same time, I am assuming that you've gone through all of the basic tutorials, you know how to turn on the plane, get it flying, so on. Instead, these are really aimed at people who are sort of comfortable with the tutorials but want to take the plane out for their first time in multiplayer and just want a few tips to avoid things that they really shouldn't be doing. So with that out of the way, let's jump to the first one. So the first few tips are all to do with the startup procedure and some things that are very easy to miss when you're starting up that can really cost you. One of the ones is right back here. This little green covered chappy, this is your IFF on switch. Very easy to miss while you're messing around with all of the rest of it. I always put this on first to make sure I don't forget, mostly because this is what stops MiG-21s from seeing you as hostile on their radar. And so forgetting to flip that will absolutely get you team killed. Next up we have down here your communication panel. So while you're passing from right to left, starting everything up, do just be sure you increase the volume knob here. Again, really easy to miss, but if this is on minimum, then even if you're on the correct channel for, say, Overlord bot, you won't hear anything. This overrides SRS's settings for the active channel. When you're setting up your weapon systems, do just make sure that you flip this little switch here into the forward 1 RO position. This sets the missiles to launch one missile at a time. By default, it will launch both missiles at the same time, which is fine for this plane's designed role of being a bomber interceptor, and so making sure you take down a large bomber. Absolutely overkill and just a waste of missiles against a fighter. So always make sure forward position, one missile at a time, just like most other planes that you're used to. Then an optional one, but something I find really useful that's been suggested to me by a friend, is to arm your cannons one at a time. So I normally go the left first, so press that for about a second and release, and then leave the right one off. What that's going to do is when you start firing, only the left cannon will fire, and so essentially you get twice the ammo, and you also get a nice warning when you're half depleted because you'll need to flip over. Really, these guns in the MiG-19, they hit really hard. They're 30mm cannons, so you don't need to have both cannons firing at the same time. One at a time, it lets you spray a little bit more, hopefully get a little more bang for your buck. Always with the MiG-19, but especially if you're following my previous tip, do just be aware that the cannons are set quite wide apart for a Cold War era jet. They are installed on the wings, not on the central fuselage as you may be used to with most other planes of this era, and so you do just have to bear that in mind when going in for a gunshot, especially if you've only got one cannon armed. You want to be aiming slightly to the side. Otherwise, you're going to see your perfectly aimed shot just swinging wide of the enemy time and time again. Next one again is something you might not be used to if you've been flying other Cold War jets, is the Afterburner in this, along with military power, is a switch that you toggle, not a throttle setting. So to enter Afterburner or military power, you need to push the throttle to 100%. Once the RPM is at that steady rating, you can then press and hold the Afterburner button. The Afterburner will kick on. Also note, though, that the Afterburner doesn't come off if you push the button again. Instead, to turn the Afterburner off, you have to throttle back until the Afterburner light cuts out. Now, one weird quirk that really took me by surprise when I first started flying the Farmer was how weakly attached the fuel tanks are. You'll almost always be taking off with fuel tanks, they're really useful, but they come off very easily, most notably if you overspeed. If you start hitting about 1,000 kilometers per hour, the wing tanks will simply snap off. That is really easy to do if you're an afterburner. And so you might be thinking, okay, I can afterburn towards the enemy, get an engagement quickly, keep my fuel tanks and just ditch them there. Your wing tanks will probably ditch themselves before you get anywhere near the enemy. So keep out of afterburner in a straight line. Using your afterburner isn't the only way you can end up ripping ordnance or fuel tanks off your wings as well. Notably, if you enter a slight dive, it is very easy to overspeed just as before. And also doing a hard snap roll can also rip the fuel tanks off of whichever wing is going up at the time. So really watch your speed and be gentle with the aircraft if you want to keep the fuel tanks actually attached. Now, one of the big differences between the MiG-15 and 19 is the 19 does come with missiles, but you can't put a lot of faith in these missiles. The K-13s are pretty bad, think AIM-9B level of bad. They don't like tracking, they will happily eat any kind of flare, so only really fire these when you are absolutely certain. If there's any doubt in your mind that the missile is going to track, it's probably not going to track. So then lastly, you've managed to survive takeoff, not been shot down by a friend, not ripped your own wing tanks off, so what's the best way to fight? And what I'd suggest is to turn. The Mig-19 is an excellent turn fighter, can outrate most planes of similar era. Only one really to be on the watch out for is the Sabre. The Sabre can and will absolutely outturn you. If you get caught in a turn fight with the Sabre, you're gonna have a bad time. Pretty much anything else you face, if in doubt, just turn with it, and if you can bait them into a turn fight, you'll find them swinging around on your nose, no problem at all, leaving you really able to dictate the fight then. So those were my top 10 tips for beginners. If you have any other tips or you have any comments on any of these, please do just leave them down below. I've had some really good input from community in my previous videos, and so really interested to see what you think beginners should know before jumping into the Farmer. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this, please do consider leaving a like, a comment, or a subscription. Really does help boost the channel. And otherwise, I hope to catch you in a future video. Until then, remember to be kind to yourself and everyone else. Cheers.